Good morning, good afternoon, and evening, baseball fans. Welcome back to the Barstool Baseball Show. This is Carl. I am joined by Klemmer and Castellani. We are fresh off Game 4 of the World Series, and the Texas Rangers are one win away. Without Adolis Garcia, without Max Scherzer, without any starting pitching, without any bullpen help. One win away from the World Series, arguably in baseball's most competitive division. We'll let you guys chop all this up. Are you guys surprised by the series at this point?
Yeah, obviously. I said the Diamondbacks. I thought the Diamondbacks had the upper hand going into Game 3, going into the series. When it going back to Arizona, and the Rangers have been just efficiently just taking care of business. The 3-0 game last night. Obviously, the umpire had a play there. Had a lot to say about that game. Alfonso Marquez. Hopefully, the Rangers give him a World Series ring. And then today, it was 11-7, but it wasn't that close. I'm sure we all agree with that. So yeah, the Rangers being this strong has surprised me. Everything surprised. I've been wrong every turn this season.
We all have. I mean, I am surprised, though I feel like we shouldn't be, because the one thing I can't believe I didn't think about this when we talked on for the Power Rankings show. At worst, the Texas Rangers will finish this postseason with a 10-1 record on the road. They are currently 10-0 right now, I believe. That is an astonishing statistic, with a lot of these games not being close. Like the Rays series was not close. The games they won in Houston, I think 2 of the 4 were close. Like these are pretty decisive wins where the offense is just showing up and showing out. That's a remarkable statistic. I think kind of a reflection of just the wonky postseason that this has been. I mean, this is they can feel it now. I really think, and we'll recap it. We'll talk about it. The pitching performances they got in Game 3, I feel like will ultimately be kind of what we look back on and say, man, that was really kind of what defined it, because we all came into Game 3 saying, we don't know what they'll get out of Fott. Maybe we get what we saw in the NLCS, but I mean, Scherzer's kind of half dead right now, and who knows what that middle relief is going to be. We'll talk about it, but like the unsung hero of this entire postseason, John Gray. I mean, wow.
Or at least World Series.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, he won't be the MVP, but you talk about a guy who gave him maybe the biggest innings possible, and good for him, because I remember he made that playoff start in Arizona in the wild card game in 2017 and got rocked. Like this is some redemption for him. So yeah, it feels like tonight felt like a coronation kind of for the Texas Rangers and everything that they've kind of gone through, not just this year, but over these last kind of 11 years, trying to get back to a point where they can win the World Series.
Too soon, coronation, too soon.
Too soon?
Yeah, too soon. It's 3-1.
All right.
Too soon. Series is 3-1.
No, but to Chris's point, it did feel a little. He didn't say it was. He said it felt like one. And I gotta agree with him, Carl. This was a beatdown, and this did feel a little bit like, yeah, the crown's not on the head yet, but they're polishing it. Like it felt like it did. This felt different. And maybe, like I said, I also thought the Diamondbacks were dead in the water when the Phillies were up 3-2 going back to Philadelphia. So this isn't the first time I've counted the Diamondbacks out and I've been proven wrong. But this did have that kind of smell to it a tiny bit. For sure.
I was trying to be nice in my opening comments. If we were surprised. For fuck's sake, most of the power ranking show is categorically putting the Diamondbacks above the Rangers. And I believed it. And Klemmer, you had the best point in the entire show. They had the advantage in games 3, 4, 5, and 7 on paper. So after 2 games in the World Series, if to handicap it over the next 5, straight up, the Diamondbacks on paper had an advantage 4 of the next 5 games, as we expected. However, so let's go. Let's just touch game. What are your big takeaways from Game 3? Game 4 blowout. There's a little bit at the end, a little bit of taste at the end. I think every baseball fan, which is just a sweet little taste of this sport. Boy, do I love it. Even when it's like 11-1, it's like, man, I hope tonight, at least just one moment, one pitch where you're like, are the Diamondbacks? I didn't know. But going back to Game 3, make or break moments up to this point in the series, like before tonight's blowout. Klemmer, give me your breakdown for a third game if you're handing out hardware, whether it's somebody who really stepped up or somebody who fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, the fuck up is, like I said, Alfonso Marquez. That's inexcusable. I'm still kind of upset about it. It was, and I saw his report.
So when you say Alfonso Marquez, we're talking about the home plate umpire for Game 3. Is it bottom of the 9th? Christian, who's hitting?
It wasn't just that. It was earlier when they scored the runs. You have when they scored the 3 runs, he missed. He would call ball strikes balls, and then it happened. You're right again, Carl. Later in the game with Christian Walker in the ninth, bottom of the ninth, nobody out. Christian Walker 3-1 count calls a ball a strike for some reason. But like I say, the bigger fuck up really is, I think it was the 4th or 3rd inning. Excuse me, when Fott gave up the runs. That was basically the Rangers got 6 outs that inning. Like I don't know what's happening. And I know Marquez they put out a report card every game of how the umpire did, and his report card was pretty decent. But that doesn't tell you everything, because the crucial moments he missed it there. And it was really disappointing. And I feel like it was in a close game that should have been even closer than it was. Marquez kind of let the Diamondbacks down.
So I'll go one step further and say I think that impacts and rolls up into today's game and how they just got their butts beat so badly. There's a deflating situation and pointing fingers that almost probably never happens in Torey Lovullo's clubhouse. But just given the circumstance, the grandiose, you're at home, Christian Walker, 3-1 on the amount of like negative energy that probably carried over in today's game. Castellani, do you believe that storyline, or am I reaching here?
No, I believe it, especially when you have a team that has so many young players on it. And I feel like they felt so good going back home. Like, hey, we have an advantage here. We have our young guy on the mound. Let's take it. I'm sure it can be somewhat deflating. Now, I think I want to say, none of us are saying he cost the Diamondbacks that game. But I think as baseball fans, it's a 2-run game in the 9th inning. We want to see the tying run, come to the dish, which that probably should have happened. I think it was Moreno, I believe, was at the plate when that horrible 3-1 call was made. So, yeah, I mean, I believe it. I think that this has been, when you look at kind of how they've played in this postseason, a momentum-based team. When they've gotten rolling, they've really gotten hot, like they did the last 2 games against Philly, like they did in the NLDS against the Dodgers. I think they were hoping to go back home with a ton of momentum, and that momentum was kind of stifled. But it was stifled in large part because you got great pitching performances by Texas. I mean, Scherzer, he got injured, obviously, but through 3 innings was looking much sharper than he looked in his previous outing. I mean, I don't know who knows what would have ended up happening, but what did happen, he gets injured. John Gray comes in there, pitches like a stud, and really it just getting through 6. That's everything. That's the hard part for Bochy right now, because I think he believes, okay, Spores, Chapman, Leclerc might make it a little bit interesting, but I kind of have faith in those guys that they can be able to close the door. It's how do we get through those 6? Those 3 innings that Gray gave him were huge. And I also, I just brought up Spores, but I mean, Josh Spores over the last 2 years total had an ERA of 5.5. I mean, this is an ineffective relief pitcher who's been nails here in October. It's just one of those things that you just can't predict. And I feel like Bochy, he's had instances like that of multiple guys. Like, remember that the year Lincecum was awful, then he came out of the pen, was fantastic. Jeremy Affeldt was always like nails in October.
Barry Zito.
Yeah, Zito, that's right. Out pitching Verlander. Like, he finds a way to get the most out of these guys. I think that really set the tone when you have these veteran pitchers who were able to come in, throw zeros, and then you had this offense that was able to get out to an early lead against Fott, who I didn't think pitched that bad, by the way. No. I thought, he was more than serviceable. But, when you have a guy like Corey Seager who can ambush a pitcher the way that he does, and you can get that 2-run home run, get out to that early lead, even with Chapman making things interesting there in the 8th, it seemed like they were comfortable there. That was a dynamite pitching performance all around.
Yeah, going back to game 3, Brandon Fott, I thought, looked about as well as you can expect for him. I mean, it would have been nice to get what you got before, but being realistic, like leveling out, he is still a rookie. He looked great, though. He fundamentally, the shit you're looking for from like a baseball guy instinct. Had an opportunity to pounce off the mound early in the game, made a great double play. Maybe it's not a great, but routine under those circumstances, a 1-4-3. But then going into game 4 today, like today's game, this is who the Texas Rangers are. And maybe I should have opened up the show like this. This is exactly how the Texas Rangers have won all season, is to just come out early in the first 3-4 innings and just fucking smash your starting pitching. Well, I shouldn't even say starting pitching because it's a bullpen game, but you don't even have a chance. So when we go back to like Bruce Bochy, just get to 6, like he hasn't had to make a ton of tough decisions. A lot of his like managerial skills have been keeping that clubhouse together, get them rolling, or coming back from, when they were shitty multiple times in the second half. But the way the Texas Rangers win, and Klemmer, you talked about, it's not close. Like they don't.
Yeah.
They're not out strategizing you. They're not, like late game hitting you. So then, did you like how much Bochy was managing tonight? The ninth inning, Klemmer. Did you like that? Did you like him making multiple pitching changes?
I do want to talk about Torey Lovullo because you brought Torey Lovullo real quick about the clubhouse, which is an interesting thing. You're like saying, hey, basically, like, because they got kind of screwed on game 3, did that carry over into game 4, which is a really interesting thing to think about, I think, Carl. You brought up a good point. I want to throw this out there. I'm not sure if I even believe it, but I want to get your opinion, you and Chris' opinion on this. Okay, so Torey Lovullo has kind of been the mouthpiece for the playoffs. The players don't really say much. Torey Lovullo has been making most of the quotes. It's kind of like that Herb Brooks miracle type philosophy where he's kind of out front. Well, today he's like on LB Network, whatever, like, chucking it up, laughing it up with Chris Russo. And I know that whole storyline is something I get it, but like, I don't know. And I'm not sure I even believe this. Just want to throw it out there. If your clubhouse is feeling that cheated and you have these weird vibes going into a bullpen game, we need everyone on the same page. Should you be yucking it up with Chris Russo? Is it the best use of your time? Or is it a thing where it's the World Series and these guys have media responsibilities and it's kind of part of the reality of the game, and we all should just kind of look the other way?
I think you're. Go ahead. Why don't you go ahead, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's more so the latter. I'll just keep it that way. I think that he has such a good feel for his players and his clubhouse right now that if he felt like that was inappropriate at all, I think he wouldn't. He either would have held back or wouldn't have been yucking it up as much. I think he knows the situation. I don't think that was much of a concern. Yeah,
I'd go a step further and say there's like 2 Torey Lovullos on. There's like the guy you see, whoever's yucking it up with Chris Russo, and then there's obviously the guy who's managing the Diamondbacks, and I don't think we'd ever see the difference. And I think that applies to most major league clubhouses.
Yeah.
Now this is extended, and of course you got to go do your media.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's also a sense across the organization with the Diamondbacks, in the PR group, that however many people work there, in the media relations and communications. This is an exciting time. How often does like High Heat want Torey Lovullo on? Probably like 3 times a year.
No, those are all fair points. I always wanted to bring it up. It was something that crossed my mind. Now, Charlie, your other question: did Bruce Bochy manage too much? I think probably. But I think back, me, I'm always going to go way back in baseball. I think back to the 1993 World Series, Game 4. I don't know if Carl can remember that or not. You might be too young. It was a wild game. It finished 15-14. Todd Stoudemire made this crazy diving play. He cut up his chin. His chin's all bloody. The game's back and forth wild. But it was 14-9 going into the 8th inning. And the Phillies had the lead. And they coughed up 6 runs in the 8th to the Blue Jays, who would eventually obviously go on to win the World Series. But this game lasted over 4 hours, which at that time was unheard of. I remember being a 13-year-old kid staying up very late watching this game. I couldn't believe I was watching a game at midnight, a World Series game. It felt very bizarre and weird. And I think back to that game a lot. You cannot let these things slip away. And I'm sure Bruce Bochy's a lot older than me, so he watched that game too. And you wonder is like, all right, if you feel an inkling of something slipping away in a World Series game, you need to kind of pull out all the stops. So I don't think it's a great idea to have them take another look at Leclerc if you don't need to. But they won the game. Now they're 1 game away from the World Series. I can understand why he did it.
You're right. I agree with you, but at the same time, he is very much aware of the limitations of this pen. And I think the one thing he wanted to make sure was that Leclerc had some margin for error. Like, he didn't want to bring him in with bases loaded up by 4, where if you hang a breaking ball, all of a sudden it's a tie game. He wanted to give him a little bit of leeway, brought him on, runners on second and third, 6-run lead. And ultimately, he didn't throw him that many pitches. He'll be available tomorrow. So I do get your point. I think under normal circumstances, you'd call it over managing, but I mean, you got to lock it down.
But who did Will Smith come in for? Didn't he make a pitching change after a pinch hitter was announced? So there was like a double pitching change?
It was Chris Stratton was in the game, and then Smith came in.
Yeah, and then the 9th, to start the 9th inning clean. And then they announce a pinch hitter. And then Bochy goes to the bullpen. And then Will Smith lets a couple guys on. He gets 2 outs. Will Smith was pissed when he came off the mound, too. Like, Jonah Heim had to calm him down. And I can understand, too, that, like, that late in your career, veteran, been there before.
You want to finish a World Series game. That's a cool moment.
Yeah, dude.
Of course.
The last thing you want to see. It's like, I didn't put us in a position to take me out. Come on, do me a solid. But this is where Bochy's coming in, and everybody in the clubhouse gets to look at Will Smith and go, who cares? Will Smith right now is
Oh yeah, he's fine. Yeah.
Slamming domestics, doesn't care. I shouldn't say it like that. He's having a good time with his buddies. He's back at the hotel lobby with his wife. They're enjoying the moment.
But in the moment, I can understand competitive juices flowing. Oh, you start. I'm sure, like any of us, like we dream it. It's reality for them. To finish a World Series game must be the cool feeling. The catcher walks over you, smiling. That's a cool. And I'm sure he's envisioning that while he's pitching. So to have that kind of taken away from you when you don't expect it must be very frustrating. But you're right.
In fairness to Will Smith, he did record the final out of the World Series 2 years ago, so he knows what it feels like. I mean, he closed down. He was money for the Braves 2 postseasons ago, so he probably wanted to know what that to relive that feeling again. But yeah, I mean, Bochy had to do what he had to do.
Andrew Heaney pitched quite well today.
He pitched very well.
I've been kind of knocking around this playoffs. He came into the game with an ERA of 6 in the postseason. Interesting. I looked him up during the game. He has a player option next year for $13 million. I'm going to guess he exercises that. But it's kind of a coin toss, though. He might not. I'm guessing he will. But that's interesting. That's something I always like. Kind of like, obviously we talk about the big name free agents, but some of these middle guys that you kind of forget about, like Andrew Heaney last year, could play a huge role in the upcoming. Baseball nerds like you two are like me, where every transaction we dial into.
Well, then go like tangential news that came out today. Jim Bowden dropped his projections for what he thought the top 10 free agents and where they would go. And building off that, Klemmer, I'm super excited in the free agents that are 50 to 100. That's where championships are decided. Obviously, the top 10 is great. That's fun. That's whatever. But Andrew Heaney's one of those guys who's number 63 on the list.
Right.
Maybe 42.
Maybe high. But right. But it's a guy that I know last year I wrote a blog about it. And I was even thinking, should I write it? Should I not? I don't know. When he signed with the Rangers, I wrote it. No one read it. I don't know. It's pretty niche. I get it. But it ended up being this huge, a huge cataclysmic baseball move because of what we had today. This. I know, Carl, you said it's not a coordination. You're right, it's not. But this was a series defining game. Almost definitely. I mean, unless the Diamondbacks have a crazy Cinderella story, which they've done before, and I'm not ready to call the series over. But this was a swing game.
So then let's look ahead to game 5, 6, 7. How about just game 5? It's Zach Gallen back. I mean, he hasn't pitched well at all. I looked at some tape. I'm not joking. There is a physical issue with his coil and his explosion. Like a true left hip, butt cheek, load up and let it rip thing. Now, this could be lower back injury. This could be a hamstring thing. It could just be classic wear and tear.
That's exactly.
And if you compare him from April, May, June, July as it goes. But the early season version of Zach Gallen is much more explosive than the version that we're seeing now. And I don't think that's an intentional choice as much as it is a physical reaction to the duration of the season. Now, he has taken the ball in game 5. Eovaldi will be opposite him for the Rangers. So I guess in pure sense, based on what we know, literally you're asking Zach Gallen to overperform what he's capable of right now based on the last number of starts. He just hasn't been that good in the playoffs other than his first start against the Brewers. And then you would need Eovaldi he doesn't have to lay an egg. He just doesn't have to dominate. So you have opposite working forces in this matchup for game 5 to hopefully get to a game 6 where you might like Merrill Kelly, on the road because he did it on the road, the NLCS. But you got to get to game 6. To get to game 6, you got to win game 5. So between either you guys feel strongly one way or the other about Gallen being toast, or if he's got a good start left in him.
It's tough because they not only need him to be effective, but they need a length out of him as well, which is kind of what concerns me here. Because I think, obviously Genkel and Seawald will be available, and they'll go all out to win tomorrow. But watching that game tonight, that looked like a bullpen that was just so taxed. And it's if they, how much can you rely on that middle relief right now? Look, I think he's got a good start in him. I mean, we've seen his stuff is too good, and as Klemmer's brought up many times, he's so good at home. But it's almost, and again, it's not over, but it's almost like a Band-Aid for time to a certain extent, where it's eventually you're going to have to go back to a bullpen that has pitched so many innings. So yeah, he's going to have to bring it tomorrow. I mean, in fairness, Eovaldi looked like a little worn down as well in his last outing. I mean, that was not a typical October Eovaldi start. So maybe for the gambling people out there, I may consider taking the over, but yeah, it's really tough because you're asking him to be a vintage version of himself, which we have not seen this postseason.
Yeah, let's talk Zach Gallen for a second. So Gallen, I met Zach Gallen. He came to Pick Central. Very, very nice guy. Very down to earth. Very impossible to rattle. Like, he's, it's these guys aren't used to talking for an hour or whatever. And he came in, it was just cool as a cucumber. But I will say, not a very big guy. Very unassuming. Marty and I were joking around and like, oh, if we put, just we could bring you over to Dave and tell him you're a new intern or employee here, or whatever, and he might believe it. If he looks like he belonged working with us more than he belonged necessarily to pitcher guy. He just looked that normal. Looked like a normal guy. And this is a guy that's thrown 237 innings this year, not counting spring training. This is a guy that has, I'm looking at it right now, a second half ERA, not counting the postseason, of 4.03. This is a guy that's on fumes. And Cory, you're right, he's explosive. I don't think he's hurt. And now, obviously, I could be wrong, could be hurt. I have no idea. But I've seen this before, and it's guys that run out of gas, and it's very normal. It happens a lot, especially when you see guys have an uptick in innings that have small butts, small hips, and small shoulders. And he has those. It's not Rick Rush or Roger Clemens, who that big behind. The right axe. It's not that. It's a guy that's built. No one's built like me because I'm a freak, but built like a normal human being. And I think he's out of gas. Now, having said that, he's at home, and I like the guy a lot. So maybe I let that kind of be more. I'm biased here because I met him, and I know I'm not my best friend, but I met him one day. I liked him a lot, and I like watching him pitch a hell of a lot. So maybe I was a little too overconfident saying he's going to lock down Game 5, but I'll ride with Gallen. He's awesome.
Yeah, he is awesome. He doesn't have those Rick Sutcliffe butt cheeks, though. You're absolutely right about that. It's a perfect assessment. The problem, and I don't want to get this is hard audio-wise, but the problem that I'm seeing from him is more lateral, meaning he's not exploding into his pitches. And the compensation for that is you can't load back into your pitches more. So there's so much more you're losing to keep your command. So it's not just velocity. It's the vertical movement's absolutely going to be compromised. I guarantee you his horizontal movement's going to be compromised. His tunneling's going to be compromised. All because of the mechanical adjustments that he's had to make over the course of the season. Now, I could be completely wrong. This gets back to Zach Gallen. He could be like, this guy has no fucking clue what he's talking about. But that's the type of wear and tear you see. And then, as a result, balls are over the plate. You can't pitch inside.
Yeah.
You can't throw that 1-0 fastball down and away for a strike that the hitter doesn't even flinch at. Umpire doesn't even think twice to call a strike. One of the most beautiful fucking plays in sports. That becomes extremely difficult for Zach Gallen to execute. How about this, though? Can we be positive? We have to talk very positively about Ketel Marte's record.
Well, I want to talk one more thing about Gallen, his mechanics, Carl, because you bring up a good point. Now, what do we do? What do human beings do when they're tired? They cheat a little. I don't mean cheat, like trying to do bad on a test. I mean, you just kind of take that inside track a bit more. And if you watch pitchers, and Carl knows a lot more about mechanics than I do because he did pitch, but guys will cheat, and they'll cheat physically. And I don't mean it's not major. It's even indiscernible to the eye, but it's there. And it can be just a molecule. It can be very small. It can be minuscule. But when you do that, you're going to leave your ball over more because you're trying to get more from less, right? As if anyone listening to this is older like me, I don't have the same oomph I used to have. So you try to do more with less. When you do that, you're never going to do it the right way. You're going to pull a muscle, do all this. Now with Gallen, he's not doing those things, but he is trying to do more with less. And because of that, the ball is at the same velocity. And I think he's changing mechanics ever so slightly. And the ball's at the same zip. The movement's been less. I've been watching him all year because I've been betting on him a lot. And plus, I just enjoy the hell out of watching him pitch. But it just doesn't have the same explosiveness. I think that all has to do with him, mechanics-wise, cheating a tiny bit because he's thrown 237.
So, for Game 5.
Yes.
The adjustment is not if Zach Gallen's going to be healthy and get back to these explosive levels. It's whether or not through the last 5-6 starts has he gotten a feel for the ball and the results in order for him to figure out the right adjustment to deliver MLB quality pitches and execute them on the biggest and brightest stage. What a time for this guy to have to make an adjustment. Interesting enough, though, in my experience with Zach Gallen, you talk about him coming in for Pick Central and spending time with him. I got to interview him last year with Jake, and I thought it was really interesting, his commentary on pitching in Colorado. And he said it wasn't about what blew me away, or what I took away from the conversation was how astute and observational he was about the changes you have to make as a starting pitcher, because the air impacts your cutter and your sinker and your slider and your aim point. He's like, yeah, sure, whatever. The ball travels further, but I have to first I have to throw the ball, and I don't get the same depth.
Right.
I don't have the same break on my two. So it took me a couple starts to figure that out. And he had talked about that as a challenge that he had to figure out. So it took him, I don't know, it was 8, 9, 10 starts, whatever. Enough time, however much time it took him in Colorado. But he was like, I'm starting to get comfortable there. And I'm just drawing on that as I'm grasping at straws here to think about Zach Gallen making adjustments for Game 5, where I would feel comfortable based on what he's done so far this postseason. It's possible.
Colorado is a great example, Carl, because I know we're getting in the weeds here, but I mean, this is probably people.
I like it.
Daryl Kyle, right? Remember he had that great curveball with the Astros, and he went to the Rockies. And you're exactly right, Carl. It's not as the ball gets hit far away. The air, and I'm not a scientist at all. I'm an idiot, but that stuff makes the curveball dip differently. It moves different. It doesn't have the same effect. So I remember Derek Lowe. He went to the Dodgers. He had a pitch in Colorado, and I think there was a running curve there because he was so reliant on the heavy sinker. It's not, and so then you're all right, if you're a Rocky GM, what kind of pitcher do I get? Do I get a knuckleball? Well, that is not going to float the same way. Do I get a fastball guy? It doesn't have the same zip. So it is an interesting kind of science experiment. And pitchers like Gallen, who, by the way, is, I don't want to talk to him for a couple hours, but was very bright. And you're right, Carl, very astute, and is not at all a dummy, and is someone that you could see was trying to figure it out. That's a tough thing to get your hands around. I mean, people have been trying to do it since 1993.
Yeah.
He's had a good look at the Rangers too. We're going into Game 5. So now,
for sure,
this brings me into another point. I had to bring this up. I'm going to forget it by the end of the show. So I'm just going to slam it right here in the middle of it. I hope people are appreciating John Smoltz and learning from John Smoltz. I texted Klemmer the other day during the game. If you guys don't have John Smoltz's audio on in the Gambling Cave, here's what he was talking about with Marcus Semien. I think it's really important. And so, John Smoltz doesn't call a lot of games, right? It's just national broadcast, just playoffs.
Correct. Regular season too for Fox, but he doesn't have a team that he calls. You know what I mean? It's not like.
So he's just purely national. He didn't give a shit.
Purely
Obviously,
Fox.
Partial to the Braves, I'm sure, but all this dude does is drop knowledge. He does not care at all about any side story, side salad, clickbait. He's literally just sitting there talking about the next pitch, next batter, next strategy. And so what was really interesting was Smoltz was talking about Marcus Semien and his approach. Why was he not performing well in the postseason? And it's because he technically, mechanically sells out on the inner half part of the plate, because that's where he can do his most damage, because he can get mistakes and he can drive mistakes. And they were talking about how the opposition throughout the postseason had done a great job of executing and keeping those mistakes away from Semien. And because it's not that Marcus Semien's a bad player, it's not that he slumps or he sucks or he's not ready for the moment. He has an approach. The other team has an approach. They are executing. He's doing the best he can. His approach is more when the other team kind of fucks up, he's ready to pounce. And I thought that was a great point that drives what we've talked about a lot in the last couple of weeks about when you get to October and who has an October gene. And this is where I want to connect everything. Where a guy where October's too big for you would be a guy who's changing or thinking about his approach pitch to pitch, who might have fouled the ball off and then is fuck, man, maybe I got to be looking outer half now. Or dude, you just spent 162 games. You spent a spring training. You spent an entire career on this approach. Mm-hmm. Are you going to change it in the 7th inning with a runner on second base based on what happened in the 4th inning? And so Smoltz had talked about that with Semien. And as he was talking about it, Semien smoked a gap in the left, smokes a double in the left center. And I'm using this as a small example to say I think John Smoltz is by far the best guy talking about baseball and baseball right now. And I didn't have this appreciation until recently, until this World Series. I'm fuck, every time. And I could be wrong if you guys want to give me other color guys I know the Mets have such an
Mets have the
unbelievable.
I was going to
The
say
Mets
that
have
was
the best. The Mets
what
have the
came to
best.
mind to me. Yeah.
So then I guess maybe on like a national level, when you have to talk to morons and you got to talk to like school children and stuff, then I'll take John Smoltz.
It's funny though, like with the you bring up like the Mets, like Ron Darling is a guy. Ron Darling is so much better on the Mets broadcast. He's with TBS.
He is. Yeah.
Like they cut his balls off at TBS. Not that he's like saying like revolutionary or like wild stuff for the Mets, but he won't get that much into. I don't know. I feel like the Mets. Maybe he's more comfortable with Gary, but I feel like he's more. I don't know, intellectual.
I think it's a familiarity thing too. Like I think it's just he knows that organization so well. I mean, it's just going through the reps. You're in that booth every single day. You know those people. Yeah, no, I felt that way too. Like I always felt like I remember always thinking McCarver was way better with Joe Buck than he was on like any other broadcasts too. It's just sometimes it's just about partnerships. Joe Davis is also an elite play-by-play guy. I feel like they feed off of each other really well. Like he sets them up, does a great job of it. So yeah, two Michigan guys, by the way, Smoltz and Joe Davis.
Joe Davis is legit, dude. Joe Davis worked his ass off to get to that position. Because there's guys in sports broadcasting that just get handed to him because you grew up across the street from Bill Belichick. Or, you know, your dad went to college with the owner. Joe Davis was calling like...
For nepotism.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was a... Nepotism is the word that explains basically what I was trying to get at.
Now,
Joe Davis grinded. Joe Davis earned it. Joe Davis was calling Indy League games. Maybe not Indy, but single A. Midwest. Lansing, Lugnut stuff.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Lansing, I have a funny John Smoltz story. John Smoltz went to my high school for a year, and there's a famous urban myth at Lansing Catholic High School. He was a varsity player as a freshman, right? I mean, the guy, future Hall of Famer, that's going to happen. The famous urban myth is that the coach told him, "You'll never be a pitcher," and that's why he transferred to another school. It's not actually true, basically. It was, I think, from what I heard, and I could be butchering this a little bit, it was a mechanical thing, an adjustment that he wanted him to make. He was probably going to transfer anyway. Goes to Waverly High School. Ends up getting drafted by the Tigers, obviously, left in the Doyle Alexander trade. But yeah, around these parts, because there's like the Diamond Classic is a very popular Lansing-based high school baseball tournament. He's brought up all the time for like he hit a walk-off home run to win it for Waverly, and that's always in the Lansing Catholic circles a very famous story is that he was told he would never pitch and therefore transferred schools. Yeah.
That's funny. I didn't know Smoltz went to your school. And Smoltz made up a great point about Simeon and how he's like a pounce hitter. Yeah. And this is why, and this is kind of goes back to kind of my point, I guess, all postseason is that I don't really believe in the postseason gene. I think talents of guys get hot, get cold. It happens. Eddie Murray, 1983 World Series, had a whole World Series. And then Game 5, he goes off, hits 2 home runs. And I feel like with Marcus Simeon, we're kind of seeing maybe, which is terrible for the Diamondbacks, maybe him getting hot. Has a 5 RBI day. And Smoltz is right. He's a pounce hitter. It's a great word for it, pounce. It's kind of what Simeon does. And when Simeon's bad, he looks off. But when he's good, goddamn, he looks like a Hall of Famer. And if he's going to get red hot, if he's going to go on one of his streaks right now, kind of like how we saw Kyle Schwarber go on a streak earlier this postseason, if Simeon's going to get red hot, I don't know how the Diamondbacks going to stop him. Even without Adolis Garcia in that lineup, if Simeon's hot, look out.
Yeah, that was a leading point that I did not get to. It was going to be part of the intro, like the Rangers, 1 game away, losing Scherzer, they lose Garcia. They didn't give a shit tonight. No one even noticed.
Jankowski went 2 for 4, 2 RBIs, 2 runs.
Huge night.
Next man up.
Jankowski, I think, is a Jersey kid. At least he went to Stony Brook, took him to the College World Series.
Played with the Mets last year. I don't think
one of the fastest guys in baseball.
I don't know. I said I don't know if he had a single 2 RBI 2-run game in his entire Mets career. So congratulations, Sebastian.
That was my. I had the Smoltz thing circled 10 times over because I have a soft spot for learning stuff about the game because you can enjoy baseball on so many different levels. Like you can just watch and be like, hit a home run. Oh wow, hit a home run. You could just go to a game and like not watch at all and have a good time. You could bet on the game. There's so many different reasons. And so I'm like very passionate about the educate, like the insight, what are guys thinking? What's coming next? What's the, not even like cat and mouse of matchup, like pitch to pitch. What's the absolute next thing that's going to happen? I think Smoltz does a better job than anybody else. Now, I also listen to the Cubs, 162 games a year. And the last thing those guys are going to talk about is the next pitch coming. Like they're talking about the next promotion, the next airline, the next place you can get a mortgage. Yeah, I understand. That goes back to the Darling thing too. That's a network thing. So let's stay on networks for a second. TV ratings aren't great for the World Series, Klemmer.
They're not. They're worse. They're atrocious. They are, shitting blood in the toilet. This is where.
Come on.
No,
they're bad. They're really bad.
And I am very concerned. Tonight's game is 11-7, but the way it played out is terrible for ratings. It was a blowout early. People tuned off. I wrote a blog about how much I hate bullpen games, and I was like, I think more people are going to watch fucking Press Your Luck with Elizabeth Banks at 10 p.m. on ABC than they're going to watch this World Series, because I just think people tuned out, and it makes me very sad as a baseball fan. I probably care too much. I've always been kind of like, I just think media stuff's really interesting. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The World Series is the World Series. Fox has it. I don't know why I care so much, but it does make me very sad. I just want baseball. It's tough. I'm old. I'm 43. I remember when baseball was the national pastime, even more than football. I mean, to some extent, it really was in the 80s. And now it's just, we're fighting the NBA for second place. And it's tough.
I think I got a blog coming out about this tomorrow, so I won't reiterate everything I'm going to say in there, but it's interesting where in sports we root for parity. We talk about, we like upsets and we root for the underdog, but the truth is, in March Madness is the prime reflection of this. We talk about how great upsets are and Cinderella stories, and yet the Final Fours that get the most ratings are the ones that have Duke and UNC and the Blue Bloods. I believe the most watched Final Four of all time was 2008, in which you had 4 number 1 seeds with UCLA, Kansas, and North Carolina was in there as well, Memphis being the other one. It's like that in baseball as well, where, yes, it is fun and funny to see the Yankees lose, but even when they lose, you watched. And I think really what kind of derailed, and look, good for the Diamondbacks. It's not to take anything away from these teams. What kind of derailed these ratings really was the Phillies choking away those last 2 games at home. I feel like if that was a team that people were connecting with star players in a big market. Now, Texas is a big market too, but I think the fact that the Phillies had been there before, there's some familiarity with the average fans, I think that really kind of killed things. Nothing to apologize for either one of these teams, but just looking at it from a objective viewpoint as an outsider, these just aren't 2 teams that really appeal to the average fans right now. Rangers have stars, but they hadn't been in the playoffs in 7 years. Diamondbacks hadn't been in the playoffs in 6 years. And, just not a whole lot of sizzle here. Still hasn't been an awful series, still hasn't been an awful postseason. But yeah, I just think that's kind of the truth here.
Dynasties bring viewers because the casual viewer starts to learn the players. It's Derek Jeter. I've seen him in the last, 4 of the last 5 World Series. I know this guy. Bernie Williams, Paul O'Neill, I know these guys. And then when the Red Sox had their run, Manny Ramirez, I've seen this guy. I know this guy. There's no one, and you say stars, like Corey Seager, we love him on this show. The average baseball fan loves him. The casual baseball fan have no idea who the fuck that is. They just don't. And that's on MLB for not marketing him properly. It's a lot of people to blame here, and they should be blamed. But Corey Seager does not get the attention he deserves from a national audience. And that's on MLB, and that's on a lot of people.
A lot of people. Now I want to change it. Now I just want to sit here and talk about how to fix it because I have solutions. We've talked about this before. It's all scheduling. 162 games, way too much.
Yeah,
way too expensive to go to a baseball game too. Corey Seager, I also would like to apologize. We waited 37 minutes to bring his name up. Did we talk about him earlier? We've talked extensively about Corey Seager. If you go back to March, I think one of us, me, had alluded to him having a monster season without the shit. But we've been talking about Corey Seager all season long. Even when he was hurt, it was like, when he comes back, the Rangers are going to be way better. So I don't feel too bad. That was kind of in jest when I said I'm sorry. But in all seriousness, though, like he's the MVP, right? World Series MVP?
Yeah, he will be. Yeah.
By like a mile?
Who's ever in charge?
One, by the way.
Yeah, second one. Yeah, that's a good point. And an NLCS MVP as well that he won in the COVID year. Yeah, I know. I mean, if they finish this thing off and he wins World Series MVP, and I know they've had guys that have won MVP, like Pudge won it, we're talking about probably the single greatest season. Josh Hamilton was fucking good too, but maybe the single greatest season by a Texas Ranger, or at least the most impactful season. I mean, he'll finish second for the MVP, World Series MVP, world champion, something that no other Ranger can boast about. It's up there. It's in the discussion. Just a remarkable season by Corey Seager. As consistent a player as we've seen this entire year. There's no slumps, consistently hot, remarkable.
Impactful. I'll take impactful as a word. As Klemmer, would you rather have Seager or A-Rod?
Like you mean would I rather?
Let me back up. I had said on Twitter that Seager was the best shortstop of the last 20 years, and then I was like, I don't mean just for the Rangers guys.
A-Rod's been better. But I would rather have Corey Seager's career. I would rather be Corey Seager as a human being than A-Rod at that point.
That's not. Listen, we're not doing morality.
No. Let's take morality.
I'm talking about A-Rod, white batting gloves, white shoes, white uniform, trotting out for the 2002 All-Star game.
Who would you rather have, Carl? Taking morality out of it, would you rather be the 2003 A-Rod? Or would you rather be the 2023 Seager? I'd rather have a ring and have a great year.
If we're doing 1-for-1 on seasons, I'm taking Seager. Yeah. So if we're talking overall career, I'm taking.
But A-Rod was better that year. A-Rod's 2003 was better than Corey Seager's.
What month in the calendar are we? Is it like right after the World Series? Probably Seager.
Yeah.
If it's like months after, I got to do my home. Those A-Rod seasons were unbelievable.
Fly forever, Carl. You know that. You're a Cub guy, man.
I know. Listen, I'm just looking for the other side of the argument. I'm looking for the other side. I want to go back
to TV ratings real quick because we talked about it here. I have some numbers here that I just saw. The 2021 World Series was Braves versus Astros. This is not two juggernauts. This is not Yankees, Cubs. This is 11.7 million average game. Last year, Astros, Phillies, 11.7 million. Keeping it consistent. This year, not counting today's game, obviously, 8.5 million. Now, I will say there's a caveat there. Longer series go, more people typically view. Games 6 and 7 and 5 will have more than 1, 2, and 3. It's just typically how it goes, obviously. But 8.5, and tonight's game is going to be a disaster. It's going to be less than that. Yeah. So I'm really concerned that this number is going to be just because the previous low was 9.8 the COVID year. The non-COVID low was that 11.7. This is beyond low. This is so bad. I'm concerned.
The league's working on it. Did you hear?
The pitching stuff?
That's exactly what the league is trying to do.
That's what my blog was about. About Manfred trying to say, hey, look, we need help. Like kind of what you alluded to earlier, actually, on this podcast, Carl. You had said they were looking at ways to have less pitchers on a roster. That's going to be the future. And I entirely agree with it. But it needs more than that.
I would love that.
It's not enough.
So here's what I would do, or I should. Let me just back up so people know what we're talking about. Major League Baseball had comments issued or something. Rob Manfred, someone in an interview this week had talked about like a next step for baseball would be getting bringing back a starting pitching matchup or the concept of starting pitching matchups. Like you want to see these starting pitchers pitch against each other. I don't know the exact moment, source, context that were brought up, but it was like part of the future plans to grow baseball would be to bring back that. Oh man, it's Glavine versus, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing you can do with that is you can make the strike zone just like a little bit bigger if you bring in like an automation system for it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to like bring in strike zone checks, I wouldn't be opposed to expanding the strike zone just a hair, an inch, a half an inch, a smidgen, whatever the like statistical margin is. To give pitchers basically like a 8% advantage or something.
Is Alfonso still going to fuck everybody over, or is that?
So they can get ahead earlier in the count. Hitters are way too patient, and we can work in tandem with the pitch clock and get the ball in play and stuff. And so that idea of like, first pitch, get your pitch, see your pitch, know your pitch. Shut the fuck up, dude. Sorry. In the modern game of baseball, like get in the box, let's play. And so I think something baseball could do if they said we have to bring back the starting pitching matchup. The way baseball is evolving now, starting pitching is going to be lucky to go 4 innings. Mm-hmm. So you have to give them an element where it's like, okay, they get this little bit of an advantage. And I don't think moving the mound back is a good idea because I think that's just going to wholesale injuries to everybody. So just like a real simple thing would be we're going to give another half ball on the outside corner. We're going to give you the old AAA Sunday afternoon strike zone. Mm-hmm. And just see how that goes for a little bit. Because a lot of what the hitters have talked about these days is pitchers aren't trying to command corners as much as they're just trying to overpower you. And so, maybe that's a strategy.
And that ties back to the philosophy. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris, real quick. This ties back to philosophy where you have you have guys go for 4 innings, 5 innings, throw 101 miles an hour. If I have to go 7 innings, I'm only going to throw 96.
Right. Yeah. No. Well, the whole. We need to make sure that you're doing max torque, max effort on every single pitch. I just think is something that I don't know if it will die, but I think it's just going to lend itself to more injuries. But honestly, Carl, what you just brought up, that strike zone existed in the 90s. If you watch Prime Pedro or Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout game, there were a lot of balls that were several inches off the plate, hit his spot, called strike. I mean, there's the famous 97.
Even
but
in
that
the moment, we knew that was shit.
That was an outlier. But
time, we were like, what is happening?
Right. But Pedro's, I think 18 strikeout game in Yankee Stadium, a lot of pitches that were by today's standards technically off the plate, but where the catcher wanted them, consistent strike zone. I think that's the number one thing that needs to be established. I'm fine with maybe a slightly more expanded strike zone. As long as it's consistent, I don't even think the hitters will mind as much.
If you're a baseball nerd and you want to see what the strike zone was like in the 90s, you need to watch one man pitch and one man only. And that's Greg Maddux.
Yep.
Because he would literally get every precise, he had the most pinpoint control I've ever seen before or since. He would manage to hit every single corner perfectly. So if you're a younger person watching this, you can go back on YouTube and see some of Greg Maddux, and you can see what that strike exactly was.
Greg Maddux was awesome in the first inning getting the corner, and by the fourth inning, they just had progressively moving the catcher more and more outside the strike zone, so that the umpire's frame of reference never really changed to call him outside strikes.
But he had the control to know.
Solid shit.
He had the control to do that, and that's why he always worked with the same catcher, Eddie Perez. He wouldn't work with Javi Lopez because Perez knew how to work with Maddux and how to move that zone ever so slightly. It was science. It wasn't pitching. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
My closing thoughts as we wrap up our Game 4 post game, going to Game 5, I guess, World Series preview, commentary show, etc. If there was a postseason where the World Series would go 7 games despite us coming off a blow-off in Game 4 and it being 3-1, we've been in enough spots, and it's kind of indicative of how these teams have played the regular season. We're up, down, multiple times. You'd be yeah, whatever. Now here they are in the World Series. So now that it's 3-1, I know the Rangers blew the Diamondbacks' doors off. There has been so much evidence this season for both these teams and in the playoffs that just when we're ready to say one thing, shut the fuck up, Carl. Watch some baseball. There could be 3 games left this season. And all signs point to it. So I don't want. I'm not. That's why I kind of jumped a little bit at the coronation comment earlier. That's it.
And look, that's fair. And ultimately, it's cliche, but don't let the Diamondbacks win tomorrow, because I bet if they win tomorrow, with the way Merrill Kelly's going in Game 6, all of a sudden you bring it back around and it's Fott versus Gray, or it won't be Scherzer or just somebody. So yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, and I do think because of that, though, I think there's going to be a real sense of urgency for the Texas Rangers, knowing that pitching and now Montgomery will do his thing, but if you get to 7, you're really rolling the dice. I think that there's gonna be a sense of urgency tomorrow. We got to close the door on this, because the deeper it goes, potentially starting pitching favors Arizona.
I'll say this: the Diamondbacks are plus 900 to win the series right now. The Rangers are minus 1400. Tomorrow's game, when people hear this today, it's basically a pick 'em. Diamondbacks are very slight favorites, minus 105. Rangers minus 150.
So what's your pick, Klemmer? Are you taking them plus 900, or are you laying the minus 1400?
I already have them at plus 140. I'm
buying another vacation house, you sick fuck.
So my NFL season, I've been incredible. I've been very, very, very lucky and had a great run. This baseball season is doing the opposite. I've had such a bad postseason. Anything I say, do the opposite. I have no idea what to think. I am done betting on baseball the rest of this year. There's 1, 2, 3 games left. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy some baseball. I'm. If you've been watching this program, you've been listening to us talk for the last month, I've been wrong at every turn, so I'm done being wrong. I'm out of the guessing business, at least for the next week.
One last note: we brought up the pitching matchup changes that the commissioner's office had talked about in the quote. That was just as a way to improve ratings. That was part of. I didn't really tie those two things together. That was more of this. The ratings are down this year. What would be something to bring, as baseball looks ahead, as we talk about this now, yeah, I know Zach Gallen's good. I know Nathan Eovaldi's good, but fuck, this ain't the 90s. This ain't Clemens.
This ain't,
I know, dude. This ain't.
We just watched the bullpen game.
Brutal.
We just
Like, that's
watched 70 guys get knocked
crazy.
around. That was awful.
That's crazy. But I also think credit to hitters as a whole. This is an evolution of, they always say there's adjustments that have to be made in your career. 100 at bats, 100 games, whatever the threshold is. Hitters as a whole across the sport have used the data. They've made their adjustments. We've obsessed over the knowledge of the strike zone to the point that the game got so dull they had to put in a pitch clock. So, what type of rule change or adjustment, or can the pitchers take advantage in the future? I do think pitcher matchups, though, starting pitcher matchups, having starting pitching healthy, Mark, I'm using this as a bad example as a Cubs fan. I need on the show, but the fact I'm about to say his name is insane. But like, Marcus Stroman can't make 16 starts. If you're going to pay it, like, the guys you bring in should be starting, and you should be highlighting them in a fun. So if it's reducing the number of games played, if it's making it easier for starting pitchers, if it's I know you shake your head when you hate when I do reduce games played. Fuck, I shouldn't have brought that up. But just like whatever tweaks we can make so that starting pitching as a whole, 15 years from now, is stronger and in a better position.
Can I say one last thing too?
Yes, please. I'm on a soapbox. Come and fucking join me.
If the Diamondbacks do win this World Series, I hope people pay attention to what Ryan Nelson did today. Pitched 5 1/3 inning, completely saved that pitching staff.
Good point.
3 hits, 1 run, no walks, 6 Ks. I think back to 2004 Red Sox. Tim Wakefield went in, saved. You have that guy that's willing to go in there. Nathan Eovaldi did it himself, right, with the Red Sox. You're willing to go in there and take one for the team like that. My hat's off to you, man.
Good point.
For you.
You saw it a bit last year where the Phillies were up 2-1 in that series. McCullers had to eat shit in game 3. Urquidy came in, gave them some what seemed like garbage time innings, but I believe they only used 2, maybe 3 pitchers in that game. Then after that, it's set up. They threw the no-hitter the next night. That is a good point. That is a good kind of outlier. Those garbage time innings do end up meaning something.
Of course.
Ryan Nelson. Ryan. Not a Ryan. Ryan.
Attaboy, Ryan. Nice job tonight, buddy. For real. Like, it's, anyone, it's easy to pack up and go home. It's a lot harder to pitch in those games. And he got them kind of back into it, but saved that staff for tomorrow. So that's pretty good. Good on him.
What a perfect way to end the Game 4 World Series recap Barstool Baseball postseason show. Just like an utterly nuanced, but just a great point in all seriousness. Because we've been getting this has been a specific postseason. So we'll figure out the schedule for how I can't make commitments because I don't know how the postseason is going to shake out. I'd like to do a recap after Game 5 if it's World Series winner or not. But we'll see how the schedule shakes out. For now, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in very much tonight and throughout the season. Carl, Klemmer, Castellani, thanking you guys from the bottom of our hearts. Happy Halloween, Klemmer. Happy Halloween, Castellani.
Thank you, boys.
Same to you, man.